Coming up tonight, collective economic interest. Prime Minister Philip Davis stressing the urgency for intervention as it relates to international tax cooperation. The updates from Cuba. Plus, lasting impressions. Botswana's president says the Bahamas tourism is like no other. Here are his biggest takeaways from the country's #1 industry. And later, the new energy minister talks renewable energy. How soon could the Bahamas see a transition? We have the answer and much more as Our News Weekend starts now. This is Our News Weekend. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Megan Shepard. It was a busy week for the nation's leader as he hosted Botswana's president, Dr. Mogwitsi Masisi, and his delegation here in the capital. Fast forward to Friday, and Prime Minister Davis traveled to the Republic of Cuba for the G77 plus China summit. It's a coalition of developing countries designed to promote their collective economic interests at the United Nations. While there, Davis stressed the urgency for the United Nations to intervene in international tax cooperation and administration issues. Jamila Mizik reports.
Prime Minister Philip Davis calling for the United Nations to oversee international tax cooperation and administration. In his address at the G77 plus China summit in Havana, Cuba, Davis pressed the issue of blacklisting.
They all lived in an environment where global tax policy was mandated and designed by the OECD, where concepts underpinning the current international tax system prefer the interests of the global north, that is, the OECD members and developed countries, at the expense of small developing countries, primarily black governed former colonies in the global south, former colonies of those same members of the OECD.
Speaking to the unfair impacts of blacklisting by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development and the European Union on countries of the Global South, Davis acknowledged the challenges encountered by nations like the Bahamas.
The arbitrary and discriminatory actions of the OECD and EU have disproportionately affected countries of the Global South, already reeling from actions and impacts of countries from the Global North. The climate crisis is largely created by the industrialized countries, many in the Global North. The effect of the climate crisis is felt disproportionately by small developing countries like the Bahamas. This is exacerbated by the arbitrary blacklisting of these same vulnerable countries, such as the Bahamas, from the very same countries that are responsible for the climate crisis.
For too long, the international tax system, mostly influenced by organizations like the OECD, has been criticized for favoring wealthier, developed nations. Davis doubled down, demanding the need for equal treatment.
We demand privileged multilateral organizations like the OECD to take your knee off the proverbial necks of countries like the Bahamas across the Global South. So the way forward for the G77 is clear. It's a path paved with technology, driven by the ambitions and aspirations of our youth, and steered by the collective wisdom of our nations. The G77 also must take a stand in support of equality among countries, governance at appropriate forums such as the UN, an environment where developing countries in the Global South have the same policy impact globally as developed countries of the Global North.
Reporting for Our News, I'm Jamila Mizik.
And the Bahamas' tourism product was one of the highlights and biggest takeaways for Botswana's president, Dr. Mogwitsi Masisi, who plans on finding ways to incorporate what he experienced on his short visit here in his home country. Berthany McDermott tells us what he found so special about the Bahamas.
The recent state visit by Botswana's president yielding tangible results for both countries. And according to Botswana's president, Dr. Mogwitsi Masisi, our tourism product is like none other. At a closing press conference for the state visit, he said the biggest takeaway was Bahamians' commitment to the product.
For one of the things that's been most impressive about us is to realize that everybody in the Bahamas is a tour operator. Everybody. That's a big takeaway. Everybody welcomes you to Bahamas with a radiant smile. Everybody knows something esoteric about Bahamas that would interest you. Everybody is selling Bahamas. Everybody we came across. That's a big, big takeaway.
The Bahamas is known worldwide for what it has to offer to visitors. The country boasts over 5 million tourist arrivals up to July, and officials expect the number to reach 8 million by the end of the year. Another takeaway from Masisi was the recently developed Nassau cruise port.
Port people come out and they immediately immersed into Bahamian culture. Immediately. All of them. We don't have that system at home. And it's the services, it's the ambiance, it's the language, it's the music, it's the clothing, the food, everything Bahamian, immediately. So it's in your face and your blood and system.
They also had the chance to experience Junkanoo at a state reception. He said it reminds him of home.
The rhythm of the beat, and the big difference is you have the costumes, elegant costumes. And do you know how much money and time and skill goes into that? The sheer splendor of color attracts even bees. So if you have that, we don't have it.
He says service while in the Bahamas has also been top tier, but the biggest seller for him was the swimming pigs in Exuma.
Your ability to take pigs and put them on an island and teach them to swim, I mean, that just blew me away. I've never seen pigs swim until I came to the Bahamas. And I actually did not believe it. I mean, I'd read about it, I've been told about it, but I just, it's a market little gimmick.
Reporting for Our News, I'm Berthany McDermott.
Thanks, Berthany. Despite a recently released public domain poll that showed the Prime Minister got a 60% approval rating, FNM Chairman Dr. Dwayne Sand says the government has been losing support. When asked if they approve of the government's job, 21% of those polled said they strongly approve, and 43% said they somewhat approve. 10% said they somewhat disapprove, and 11% said they strongly disapprove. 16% said they did not know. They surveyed 589 people. Sand says when looking at the number of crises impacting residents, it seems Bahamians are finding it difficult to live.
The most significant crisis right now is the cost of living crisis. It is so expensive to live in this country that not only poor people, but working class people and upper middle class people are finding it almost impossible to make a living. They can't pay their light bill. I got my light bill this month, $2,100 of light bill, okay? The month before was more than $2,000. There are people saying, what you want me to do, pay the light bill or eat? And then BPL coming to disconnect.
Now, the Office of the Prime Minister is hitting back at critics over a recent public domain survey that revealed the Prime Minister and his government got a 60% approval rating from the public. Communications Director Latrey Ramming.
The opposition used the same public survey firm for their analysis and surveys. One, the government isn't occupied by poll numbers. I think we leave those surveys to be done by the scientific persons who do it. What is the true measurement for us is how our policies benefit the Bahamian people. Of course, it's encouraging to see that there is public support for some of the things we do.
His comments came after Free National Movement Chairman Dr. Dwayne Sand said he believes the Davis administration has been a disaster, adding the Bahamian people are facing multiple issues. Meanwhile, Ramming says the government will keep their eyes on the prize.
We have to remain focused on delivering our priorities for the Bahamian people and make sure they feel our policies. I mean, we're 2 years in. I think it's significant. I mean, in the second year, ministers had 45%. And so the fact that the Prime Minister could hold that support between 60 and 70 is encouraging, but we got a lot of work to do.
Police in the capital are investigating a fatal crash that claimed the life of a lone driver around 3 this morning. Reports indicate the driver of a blue Nissan Skyline was traveling south along Mackey Street when they lost control and collided with a utility pole that caused the car to catch fire. Fire services responded, and once they extinguished the blaze, they found charred remains in the driver's seat. Police now have the grim task of identifying the driver. Police are also investigating the circumstances surrounding the death of a man who was discovered lying at the bottom of a flight of stairs in the area of Hospital Lane and Rogers Corner around 1:45 a.m. this morning. Emergency medical services responded and conducted a thorough examination of the victim, confirming he had no signs of life. An autopsy will be performed to determine the cause of death, and investigations continue. Police are searching for 3 men responsible for robbing a man of cash. The victim was held up on Bimini Avenue shortly after 11 p.m. on Friday. Initial reports say the victim was standing in front of his residence when he was approached by 3 men. One of them, whom he recognized, pulled out a firearm and robbed him of an undisclosed amount of cash. The culprits escaped by running from the scene. Police are appealing to anyone with information regarding this matter to contact CID at 502-9991-3, 919-911, or Crime Stoppers at 328-TIPS. And now it's time for your first look at weather. Meteorologist Ian McKenzie joins us in studio for a check on your weekend forecast. Ian, what can we expect this weekend?
Good evening, Megan, and good evening, Bahamas. Okay, we're going to take a quick look at the tropics right now. We have TD, or Tropical Depression 15, out there spinning, expected to become Nigel by later tonight. Current conditions outside our studios, we're under mostly clear skies with a temperature of 85 degrees. Our winds are from the east-northeast at 9 miles per hour with a feels-like temperature of 81 degrees. Current temperatures across the country right now. In Freeport, our nation's second city, we are 83, 84 in Marsh Harbor, Abaco, 87 in Allenstown, Bimini, 85 in Great Harbor Key to Berry Islands, 84 in Governor's Harbor, 85 in Nassau, and 86 in Nicholstown. For the central Bahamas and Camps, 85, 85 also in Georgetown, 84 in Deadman's Key, Long Island, 85 in Coburn Town, and 84 in Arthurstown. For the southeast Bahamas, 85 in Duncantown, Ragged Island, 84 in Colonel Hill and also Delectable Bay, 84 in Abraham's Bay, Maguana, 85 in Providenciales, Turks and Caicos, and rounding off our temperature profile, Matthew Town and Agua, also at 85. Here again, a quick look at our satellite imagery. We can still see Tropical Depression 15 out there. Again, expect to become Nigel. We want you guys to stick around as we have an extended forecast straight ahead. Meg?
And still to come on Our News Weekend, we are in the peak of hurricane season, and the Insurance Association of the Caribbean wants you to make sure you're covered. We'll tell you more about micro-insurance. Plus, what does the future of power generation look like with a new minister at the helm? We've got the details when Our News Weekend returns.
Doctors Hospital has reimagined primary care. We've invested to improve our health system, ensuring that accessible, affordable, world-class clinical care is closer to you. Your relationship with a primary care provider shapes the foundation of your overall health. Our new, modern primary care facilities are where critical diagnosis and true personalized treatment begin. With locations across New Providence, Grand Bahama, and Exuma, we invite you to experience the Doctors Hospital difference. Book your next appointment at clinics.doctorshos.com.
Is your home insured? For many in the Bahamas and the wider Caribbean, the answer is no. While the Insurance Association of the Caribbean is hoping to make insurance more accessible with something called microinsurance, our Marlena Leonard explains.
The Caribbean may end up leading the way when it comes to closing the protection gaps in insurance coverage.
One of the projects that we're going to be looking at in terms of trying to bring the regional influence of the companies that are part of that association is around the whole issue of protection gap closing. And one of the things that I'd like to have as my signature list of items to address is really around this whole protection gap issue. So I'm looking forward to working along with my colleagues that come from all over the Caribbean, some of them out of the Bahamas as well, to come up with the kind of strategies that we can collectively get behind to start to address this issue that really is a global issue, but more acute for the Caribbean region than it is in most places.
But for many who don't have insurance on their property, the issue is often one of accessibility and financial strain. Ward says the solution might be what's called microinsurance.
Microinsurance is just one part of trying to, in the context of what we're talking about, get to a point where you're closing the protection gap. And the protection gap really speaks to the amount of persons or business entities that are able to buy insurance relative to the amount of insurance that's available within the marketplace. So, for example, when we talk about losses, sometimes you hear them quote numbers that relate to the overall economic loss and then the insured loss. And in many cases, the insured loss is going to be less than the economic loss. And that speaks to the protection gap.
And in a world where storms seem to be coming stronger and with more frequency, he says that protection gap can put quite the strain on governments who are often left footing the bill.
One way of addressing the protection gap is really coming up with a microinsurance solution that will assist people who typically, for a number of reasons, don't buy insurance, mostly because of the economics involved. And how do we therefore come up with a product that is tailored to the marketplace that provides some level of protection, thereby closing the protection gap and allowing them to have a recovery that doesn't necessarily fall back on the last resort being the government.
Reporting for Our News, I'm Marlena Leonard.
We now have a new Minister of Energy, but what does that mean for the future of power generation? We asked the new Energy Minister, JoBeth Colby-Davis, if we could soon see an accelerated shift toward renewable energy through incentives. Colby-Davis saying,
I think that conversation has been happening for quite a while in our country, just because of where the global trends are going now with the renewable sector, alternative energy, and just the cleaner energy solutions. And so I thought to say to the team as we were doing the tour that it's so important that BPL is taking the lead on this. I'm excited to see some of the changes that they're about to put forward in the public, because being the leaders, it helps to encourage the private sector to take it seriously and make the investment, and then the government can partner with them and encourage and support them.
The Energy Minister adding that the expense connected to converting to solar energy can be a strong deterrent.
Sometimes you want to do it when it comes to renewable, it's really expensive. And so we're going to be putting forward some plans and have a lot more discussions on the energy and alternative energy side in the public to help and give them the information needed, but also to see how the government can partner with them.
Still to come on Our News Weekend, the Bahamas Unified Bus Driver Union not backing down. They say they're still waiting on an approved fare increase. Plus, free legal advice on the way for those in need. The 16th annual clinic is just days away. We'll tell you when right after this break. Stick with us. This is Our News Weekend. Welcome back. Bus drivers aren't backing down when it comes to their push for a fare increase. But so far, the Davis administration isn't budging on the issue. The public relations officer for the Bahamas Unified Bus Driver Union says they're still waiting to hear from Minister of Transport, JoBeth Colby-Davis, on a fare increase for the industry. The union recently released a memo saying bus fares would increase. The Ministry of Transport released a statement saying no increase has been approved by Cabinet. However, according to Taylor, some customers haven't been mandated to pay the suggested increase.
When we came back from the pandemic, persons were paying us $1.50, some were paying us $2, some were paying the regular fare $1.25. At this point, persons are still paying the same thing, $125, $150, $2. So with that notice going up, persons just put more effect inside it. More persons are going with the $150 and the $2 because they're still saying that we need that increase.
Over $20,000 worth of free legal aid is being offered to anyone who needs it. Halsbury Chambers will be hosting its 16th annual free legal clinic. The event is being held on September 23rd and seeks to be a community initiative assisting residents in need of legal services without having to foot the bill. Here's the founding partner of Halsbury Chambers, Granville McCartney.
We certainly wish the public to take advantage of this opportunity. Things are quite tough in the country today, as it's been for many, many years. And this is a service we thought, as attorneys in this firm, dating back to 2004, that we would provide. I dare say that we are the first law firm in the Bahamas to do any sort of a free legal clinic, and we are most appreciative of the public.
As for the services they'll be offering,
we will be dealing with mortgage matters, mortgages, conveyancing, matters pertaining to agreements for sale, quieting actions, landlord and tenant issues, divorces, child maintenance matters, adoptions, guardianships, child protection orders, breach of contracts, labor and employment matters, severance packages and wrongful dismissals, binding over the peace actions, immigration, debt collection, personal injury, sexual harassment, wills, probates and estates, incorporation of companies, registration of business names, trademarks and copyrights.
Still to come on Our News Weekend, meteorologist Ian McKenzie is back in the weather center and he has the details on the tropics. That's coming up when Our News Weekend returns. It was a pretty wet start to the weekend with heavy rain showers in the capital today, but thankfully, meteorologist Ian McKenzie joins us now with an extended weather forecast. Ian, what can we expect for the rest of the weekend and as it relates to the tropics?
Thanks, Megan. Well, across central Florida, we had a stalled out frontal boundary, and just ahead of that frontal boundary, we had some shower activity across the extreme northwest Bahamas, with some actually drifting across the northwest Bahamas in the capital today. We saw some localized flooding, so that means more potholes, Megan. Oh, so we are asking you drivers to exercise extreme caution and care as you traverse the streets. Back just over, well, to the east of us, we're looking at another tropical depression, number 15, as I spoke to you about earlier, TD15, expected to become Nigel later this evening. And TD15 is expected to move towards the northwest, become a hurricane by 8 p.m. tomorrow evening, and actually become a major hurricane by 8 p.m. on Tuesday before it shifts north and then pulls to the northwest of us. But no direct impact expected from it. However, we do expect some hazardous boating and beaching conditions to pick up again by early Tuesday. So sorry for you boaters and beachgoers. We're asking you to exercise extreme caution and care. Lee is still out there causing some havoc across the maritime Canada area right now, Nova Scotia area. We're asking residents who have loved ones up in that area, give them a call, see what's going on, because we heard that there were some down power lines and trees in that area. Looking at our September 22nd to 24th in the Atlantic Basin, showing low activity. Hopefully that forecast holds and we can finally get some peace and quiet. But again, we still have a peak for the October portion of the Atlantic hurricane season. So we're asking residents to maintain your vigilance because the end of the season is not until November 30th. Here's a look at your boating forecast for the northwest Bahamas. Small craft should exercise caution due to those swells and also those rip currents. Winds of east to southeast tonight, becoming southerly at 10 knots or less tomorrow. Seas running 3 feet or less tonight and up to 4 to 7 feet in those northerly swells. And you can expect a high tide at 9:33 p.m. tonight. For the central and southeast Bahamas, small craft caution will remain in effect thanks to those swells. Rip currents for you swimmers rather. Winds will be northeast-east at 10 knots or less. Seas running 3 feet or less, but up to 4 to 7 feet in those northerly swells. Here's a look at your national forecast. And in the extended forecast, again, 1 or 2 showers and thunderstorms popping up across our area tomorrow. We expect gradual clearing as high pressure builds across the area and that frontal boundary dissipates. Highs staying around the low 90s, with your lows getting up to the low 80s, upper 70s, reminding persons during the daytime hours to remain hydrated and refrain from extended periods outdoors. Megan?
Thank you so much for that extended weather forecast, and thank you so much for joining us for our News Weekend. On behalf of the entire team, I'm Megan Shepherd. Have a safe and wonderful weekend.